All right, welcome back. Episode 61, Pickers Market. It's been a while since all four of us have been even in a room together.
Yeah.
Lisa's been gone for 2 weeks. Keith and I were gone, and then we had some work from home stuff yesterday and Monday, and
all good.
It's probably been over 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's probably been almost a month since all four of us.
Dang.
Lucky listeners, we're all back.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
Yeah. Kyle?
Pretty good.
Yeah. Lisa?
All good.
You look all refreshed from your long
am.
vacation. Good
Yes,
for you.
I am. Good to see you all again.
She didn't have to sit next to me for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well,
I think
it's
three.
That was part of it.
Three. Yeah,
it's all the new Aperol spritzes, or
Yeah,
what was the one you're talking about? With blood orange?
The Sarti spritz.
Oh,
that's
there
a
you
new
go.
trend.
Right.
The new European drink.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I have to do a taste. I have to do a taste.
Can you get it here at like restaurants in the US?
Yeah, I have to do more research on that. But
Okay.
if it is the case, we will have to do some
testing.
Taste testing.
Perfect. All right. Let's get to the 3 truths and a lie, since Lisa added one last week, right? So we've got 4 options now.
What?
Okay. So since it's episode 61, there are exactly 61 moons orbiting the planet Jupiter. Route 61 in the U.S. is nicknamed the Blues Highway. Roger Maris hit 61 home runs in 1961, breaking Babe Ruth's single-season record at the time. And the 61st element on the periodic table is named after the Greek god Hermes, or Hermes, however you want to pronounce that.
Hermes.
Yeah.
Wow. Lisa, you want to go first in this one, since you started this new trend of adding?
Yeah, because I couldn't decide last week, so I was like, why not adding another one? Well, so I have no idea about any of those, to be honest. The second one I can see, that Route 61 is the Blues Highway. I can see that. The element, I don't know. 61 moons, I don't know either. I would say C is wrong, because 61 home runs in 1961, that seems too much of a coincidence for me. So I go with that.
Okay.
Kyle?
I default to C when I don't know. So I'm going
test taking days. You're going C as well?
Yep, I am.
Moons, I have no idea, but I was going to go C, but I can't have all 3 of us going C as well. I think it's like 62 or 61 and 62 or something. I think that's the problem with that one. But since you two already have that one covered, who knows about this periodic table? We have to get rid of that one. No one knows that. I'm going to go just pure guess, which I'm going A, moons.
It is A.
Oh.
There's actually 90 observed moons
See,
around Jupiter.
That's how you guess on test.
Can you name all of them?
Name what?
The moons.
I don't know that they
90.
Do they name the moons?
Keith knows a song about them. He can do all 90.
Yeah. I know it's a wax on, wax off. My kids circling. Do your kids know that one, Kyle? The moon song?
No, is there a moon
like
song?
An elementary school. My kids sing it every once in a while. I'll just shake my head at
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'll have to maybe bring a little clip of that next week for us.
All right. So Keith and I last week, we were at, and I guess I'll throw a binger in there too, but we were at what we call Gradient Gala.
Yep.
So I guess, Keith, if you want to just give a quick.
Yeah, it's a rewards trip for our top 200 advisors. And they bring their families, which is, I think, the best part of it. And I think there's over 500 people between Gradient employees, those 200 advisors, and their families. We went to Quebec. Usually these events, we have a gala and then a grand gala, which is later in the summer. So it's, the top 200 and then a top 25. It's kind of the breakdown. It's fantastic. They do a small business meeting. I presented, on Great Investments for 15 minutes, which is, well, that's enough in that kind of venue. So it is good because people are there to have a good time, meet families. And that's what I appreciate. I bring my wife. You brought, you went solo this year, but it's nice because then they get to meet your family as well, and you kind of make bigger connections. And it's a good event. It's in Quebec. It's the first time I've ever been to Quebec. Thought it was a beautiful city, great walking, great history. Felt like you're in Europe without going to Europe. Only issue had it, I think there was no directs from Minneapolis in a lot of cities, so it was a little hard to get to and get back from. That and the weather was kind of subpar for
somehow a 3-hour total flight turned into a full day of travel.
Travel. It was
Mm.
kinda
No,
It was
crazy.
pretty bad.
What were your thoughts on it?
I
Since
mean,
that's your first one.
It was my first one that I went to, and it's different, right? Like, and I think it'll be different if it's at a resort versus like in the middle of a city, because me being solo, trying to find advisors to go mingle and
Yep.
hang out with or whatever, but everybody just went off and kind of did their own thing. And so, I
Yes.
ended up working during the days a little bit rather than, just because everybody's not there. So you can't find anybody.
Yeah, so I think
But-
some people really appreciate the fact they can just kind of slip in, from the visor base, that they can slip
Yeah.
into the, because it's a vacation for them as
Yeah,
well. So
for
they
sure.
like that. And then I think the pros and cons is, like you said,
Yeah.
if you were looking for some advisors to talk to, it's like, it's not a resort where you'd run into
Yeah.
them, because all of a sudden they could be wandering around the city.
Yeah.
So Events and Travel did a fantastic job. They always pick a great location, great activities. They had a Cirque
I mean,
du
it was
Soleil,
beautiful. Yeah.
beautiful. They had a Bridgerton evening, which is kind of fun. They had everybody dresses up in costume. So
Mm.
top notch. I think the advisors absolutely love it.
Well, it was nice because I don't know that I'd just like go to Quebec City for a vacation either. So it was kind of nice to
Yeah,
Mhm.
go
good.
on that and just see it. And because it was a beautiful city, like a little restaurants and shops and different
Yeah.
things to do. So
Felt like
it was,
Europe.
it was for sure.
Yep.
But then it's funny because then you go like 5 minutes outside of like that old Quebec City, and it's like normal downtown,
Just like a normal city.
suburb.
Yeah.
type
Oh,
of-
really?
I think,
yeah.
it was, yeah, for sure.
But all right, we'll get to a hot button. We'll get Kyle and Lisa included on this podcast at some point. So, I want to keep this apolitical, but U.S., Iran, Israel, right? I think that's the big hot topic over the weekend.
Mhm.
U.S. officially bombed 3 nuclear sites in Iran, and now we have I guess we are in a ceasefire at this point. We'll see if that holds. But I want your guys' initial reaction on that Saturday, Sunday when you guys heard about it. What was your initial thought on what the markets were going to be doing?
Go ahead, Lisa and Kyle.
Well, I saw that and I was like, well, that's going to be a fun Monday. And I would have lost a lot of money betting on if the market open red or green
Mhm.
and what markets are doing. So I was really surprised, and I was like, okay, like what is going on? Like completely opposite reaction of what I thought to myself on the weekend when I saw this. Yeah, quite interesting.
Kyle, similar reaction or different?
Yeah, no, pretty similar. I mean, I thought oil was going to be spiking, and I looked at Bloomberg, and it sure enough was initially.
Initially, yeah.
Right. But then come Monday morning, it completely inverted, just completely unwound. So, yeah, I mean, it is interesting because you look back at some of the other like geopolitical issues. I mean, we've had a bunch of them, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a couple minutes. But it's expectations versus reality, right? It's
Mhm.
almost like what works in a market with that kind of volatility. Like how big of a magnitude of an issue does it need to be to actually drag markets down? There was an interesting piece at my old shop about geopolitical risks or whatever. And historically, the markets are always usually up very shortly after a big like conflicts over the last 100
Mhm.
years. It's
Mhm.
always usually like within, a month, it's always green markets pretty much through and through. So it's
I guess the
counterintuitive.
well, but if you think about it, the risk is now, or the potential overhang is now gone.
Right.
If you think about it.
Yeah. People
Right,
don't like uncertainty.
Yeah.
And now it's certain.
So like if you're uncertain if US was going to bomb Iran, they finally did it.
Right.
Now that risk is gone, I guess. I don't know, Keith, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's weird. I do think, generally speaking, when in these conflicts, the market investors are starting to just kind of not ignore them, but kind of to the point of history. If you wait a few weeks, it's usually a sell-off and then a correction. I think the market's just moving that sell-off to we really not going to sell off, and
Mhm.
it will look at fundamentals. Now, one thing that does surprise me, I'm not sure if we'll talk about later, is oil. I get that it was maybe, the initial over the weekend, if you look at futures, it was spiking up. I thought, okay, maybe it'd be up a little bit or flattish. I wasn't expecting, because they didn't really bomb any of necessarily the oil sites. I think that would have been a bigger problem.
Mhm.
So that was one thought. And then, but what surprised me is then also, I think oil finished down 5%. And then I think yesterday it followed down with another almost 5%. So it's like, we're down 10% from the weekend. So we basically had, us bombing Iran, probably a truce, at least for the time being, and oil's, down 10% in a matter of a couple days. So it's like, what was the market expecting prior to the bombing of the nuclear, which I don't think anybody expected that. So it's like, was the market really expecting something worse than that to be the price of oil? That's
I
what
mean, it must have been. I mean, if you think
That's-
about it as like the Strait of Hormuz, so much oil goes through there.
yeah, what,
and
20%?
Yeah, but most of that doesn't even come to the U.S. It's mostly to China.
Yeah.
So, if you look at a lot of the U.S. producers like Occidental Petroleum or EOG or, like Diamondback or, any of those kind of more localized producers that aren't the big integrateds, they were all like big down.
Yeah.
Big down days for the last couple days. So it seems like embedded expectations were, I don't know what they were. It's just
It
weird.
just surprised me that I wouldn't expect it. I don't think I heard anybody ever saying that the U.S. is so close to bombing Iran. So I would expect at least a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction of like, okay, if that's it, then all of a sudden the oil fields are going to get hit. And this is even before the truce got announced.
Well, okay, but what about on the geopolitical side, right? So like there was really nobody came out in support of Iran, right? They condemned the bombing, but then no one really came out to say, yeah, we'll back Iran for anything. So if they do retaliate, we'll join, right? So maybe that was part of it. Like it wasn't going to escalate to a broader war because there's no way Iran can compete with the U.S. military. I mean, just the 7 B-2 bombers we sent over there are basically the military budget of Iran put together, right?
Yeah.
So like, maybe the market just said this isn't going to turn into a broader conflict and we're okay with what happened and move on. And
that must be it why oil is down. But I still kind of.
But I mean, they didn't,
because anything
like
can
Kyle
spill
said,
over.
they
Anything can
didn't
spill
bomb
over.
but they didn't do anything to the oil facilities,
Infrastructure, yeah,
right?
I get
So-
that. The straits are, Hormuz, it's 20% that go through there that sound like now they probably won't touch, at least underneath the
Well,
truce.
yeah. So to add on to that, the day later, they came out and said that they were thinking about closing that down, which I think then you might see something happen with oil. If 20% of your supply goes offline, I mean, even though most of it goes to China, you still need to source it from somewhere.
Well, part of it too, though, is because I mean that they don't control both sides of that strait, though, right?
No, they would have to basically attack ships going through and
right.
Right?
Yeah, because the other side is what, UAE, right? It's on the other
Yep.
side of it. Yeah. So I mean, there's a vested interest to
keep it going.
keep it going. I would, so
Yeah. But okay, so let me ask you guys this. So does geopolitical risk really matter anymore? Because it certainly doesn't feel like it matters because you have Russia, Ukraine, right? That certainly hasn't made any impact. You've had Israel, Hamas going on since October of last year, really hasn't done anything. And now we have this Israel, Iran / kind of US and doesn't seem to be doing anything. So do we just look past any geopolitical conflict at this point and say everything eventually will be all good and just get over it?
yeah, I mean, I would say a couple things come to my mind. The first would be timing, right? Like it's really easy years after the fact to look at a chart and see the tiny squiggles and be like, I mean, Binger does that RIAU. He has the earnings chart or whatever, and he's like, his comment was, oh yeah, during COVID you could see the one teeny down, GDP contraction or whatever, and it's like, oh, didn't really make a difference, off we go. So that being said, in the time, if you compress it to just October 7th, the markets were down, and they were down double digit, I think, over the course of the week, and they rebounded a fairly quick amount. But I think so time is one thing, and maybe that goes back to just the clients and advisor base to say, okay, you're not day trading here.
Yeah.
Being patient and time arbitrage, time in the market's more valuable than timing the market, right? So that would be one key takeaway, right? Things will work themselves out over time. And then the other would be sector rotations come to mind. So if you look at like October 7th, one great example would be the lead up to that for a year with the defense primes, so Lockheed Martin, Raytheon or RTX, L3Harris, General Dynamic, Huntington Ingalls, Northrop Grumman, all those companies had severely underperformed for a year going into that.
Mhm.
They were like very, very strong underperformers. October 7th happens, and it was a complete reset on that industry group. And then they saw about a year of outperformance, and then now it's come back off. And geopolitical kind of tides change, and now you're seeing sector or I guess industry leadership with those again. So so I don't know if that is helpful in framing the context of the way I'm thinking about it, but yeah, it's more like time in the market, being prudent long-term stewards of the investments, and then also taking tactical opportunities when they present themselves, I think, are two strategies to think about in the context of geopolitical risk.
Lisa?
Yeah, I think to Kyle's point, there's some form of desensitization among investors and people, because we had that so close together, like Russia, Ukraine, Hamas, Israel, and now the latest one in the Middle East. So I think investors are used to constantly hear about that geopolitics, escalations, constantly are surrounded by that. It's pretty recent in their memory what the markets did, because all three escalations were pretty close together. And I think you mentioned that before with the research paper. I saw some, it might have been the same, from Deutsche Bank, which they say, and kind of was even before World War II, that in the 3 weeks following an escalation, market react negatively, but in the subsequent 3 weeks, they rebound or even are better off than before. And so I think investors kind of have that in their memory and know that and can sit it out and can watch it a little bit more from afar than reacting too strong to it. I would say that plays into it.
Keith, you've been in the business the longest. So
Thanks for calling me the old guy again, Tyler.
well, I'm
he didn't deny it.
No.
Does right now, do these conflicts, do they feel different than ones that have happened in the past, or is it kind of the same and it's just?
I think it's kind of the same. I think all you guys' points are valid. I think part of it's people are getting desensitized to it. I think the other thing is people do look at history as a guide and say, a month later, now markets are going to be up. So if I'm a smart investor, they'll kind of, you're compressing that time frame. I think it's just because of information is so much quicker. I mean, the one thing that we'll have to worry about at some point in time, it's all, investments about probability, outcomes, and things like that. So, historically before, you're kind of had a longer probability of things dragging on, and maybe people are shrinking that, saying it's going to be shorter, less impactful. We just have to be a little careful if all of a sudden one of these starts to spin out of control. That I think that's where it really surprises the market. So just keep that in the back of everybody's mind. But I do think, generally speaking, the market does a good job of discounting the impact. And Kyle definitely mentioned it. You see sector rotation. I mean, so at the top level, it doesn't look like, if we look at the chart, not a whole lot's going on up and to the right, which is what we like. But underneath, defense stocks, especially you mentioned the U.S. ones, but European ones, Tyler, you probably owned some or in the past, and the G40I is those stocks have been absolutely home runs from recently, just because of all the money that the U.S. says they're not going to contribute as much to NATO. Also, in the European countries, you need to start chipping in. That's a huge benefit for those primes and contractors over there. So I think there's opportunities for us as investors to kind of find if these situations arise, and that's what we look at. At the end of the day, right? We're investing in companies, and this geopolitical has impacts. We just, I think we were a lot more leery of it. Historically, I think we're becoming less of it just because of these other reasons that history shows it's actually a good time to be investing. If you're a patient investor, time in the market's more than, trying to time the market. So at the end of the day, if some people get confused, it's maybe just take a deep breath and just kind of watch what's going on. And in the end result, you're usually better off that way.
The other thing that I've been thinking about on this is it almost feels like as long as these stay regional conflicts, right? And you don't start to get the what I'd call the big boys into the mix, like US, China, your India's, Russia's in a regional conflict. But as long as like the big military countries don't start to get too involved
Mhm.
and start backing one side or the other, I feel like the market doesn't have to worry too much because these countries are so small and minimal on the global scale, right? So like I remember when Russia invaded Ukraine, within all the US ETFs, they wrote their Russian assets down to 0.
Mhm.
And when Russia's a 0.2% of an ETF, like it's a minimal
Doesn't-
impact,
yeah.
right? So that's the other part that I think about it is as long as these just stay regional, there's not a big impact. I mean, the 20% oil
Mhm.
thing could be a big impact if they close the strait, but like generally speaking,
Yeah.
Iran's GDP doesn't make up a whole lot of the global GDP.
That can, yeah, I totally agree with that. The one thing that comes to the back of my mind is how quickly something like that can escalate, though,
Yeah.
because like World War One literally started with a assassination in
Yeah.
Serbia,
Yeah.
and these kind of defensive intermingling of policy, legal, regulatory, all these kind of partnerships that these little countries may or may not have can cause knock-on effects to happen and cascade. So, one thing that's, since we're talking about geopolitical, Taiwan, it's
Mhm.
there, it exists, it's been a hot button issue for a while now, and you've seen, record numbers of sorties from China going, over the island and around and doing that kind of thing. And, Japan right there, you've had, I mean, I remember when I started doing securities analysis, the 9-dash line in the Chinese,
Mhm.
in the South China Sea, that was like a big thing. And Japan and China were fighting along with the Philippines and Malaysia and other countries over these waterways. And that just seems like a flash in the pan, right? Like it was a big thing in the news for a little bit in the kind of 2009, 10, 11. And it got hot enough where on mainland China, they were actually burning Japanese car dealerships because of these issues. And you think about that issue and you're like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. But if that conflict were to escalate between those two powers, I don't think most Americans realize, like, from World War II, Japan in their constitution was demilitarized, and the U.S. is their protector, right? So if something happens where, a conflict were to arise between those two powers, with or without Taiwan, whatever, like the U.S. might be drawn legally into a battle they might not be anticipating. And people don't really realize that because you're like, oh, well, why is that our conflict? Because,
Yeah.
80 years ago, we did this thing, right? So where we inked a deal to end a prior war. So it is interesting that looking at some of those things where they might be small today,
Mhm.
but just keeping an eye on it. And
Yeah.
I think, Keith, your point on like the black swan, where it's
Mhm.
like, what would it take for something like that to happen? That's probably the way to catch most people by surprise.
Yeah, that's it. And I think oil is so important from geopolitical, because that's we talk about how it goes in everything. It's a cost. So when
Mhm.
oil went up, that was my fear. I think that was kind of the silent kind of benefit of the market this year that no one's talked about, is oil prices coming down gradually.
Mhm.
And then we hit $60-$65, and all of a sudden this conflict starting to, Israel, Iran, other stuff in the Middle East starting to heat up. All of a sudden oil's at 75. I think, and people are if you go back before the weekend, and all the stuff is like, okay, this is bombing goes, that we're talking, people are throwing $100, 120 out.
Mhm.
And now it seems like we're down 10. We're back in the mid 60s. It seems like a
Yeah.
distant memory, but that if it does go up for whatever reason, I think that is certainly something that is very
Mhm.
problematic for the stock market.
Yeah. All right, we'll move on to another one. Another hot button, but this Perplexity AI. Have you guys been reading up on any of this?
Mm-hmm.
Internal discussions at Apple potentially to buy them out. Meta has actually met with them at a potential purchase, but it's basically an AI search engine that's this is, according to AI, this is what
AI according to AI?
yeah, so
Wow.
Perplexity AI, the distinguishing thing is it's not a traditional search engine, but it offers concise, summarized answers based on real-time web searches and various AI models rather than just a list of links. So it's more tailored to what you're looking for, I guess.
Mhm.
But the last valuation as of May 2025 was $14 billion. So it doesn't seem like, despite everything going on, consumer weakness, geopolitical risk, it doesn't seem like AI interest investment is slowing down at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is there anything that can slow AI down at this point?
I think we're still in the gold rush stage.
Mhm.
It's because if you find the solution for, there'll be many solutions for different problems, but if you can find something that the everyday person, whether it's a search or other things that we're not even talking about, just making businesses fundamentally more efficient, it's going to be a home run. You see, and we didn't talk about, you mentioned, but Meta's buying up a bunch of AI and they're throwing the huge billions and billions of dollars at different
Mhm.
projects. They put 49% into another company that does AI, and these are AI companies you never heard of, and it just
Well, so that actually brings up another question. So it's all the big guys that are just buying these, I'll call them little, but they're still
Mhm.
worth 500 million, $1 billion. Like, are we ever going to have companies like an OpenAI again, or is the Apple, Meta, Amazon, Googles of the world just going to gobble up all of
Mhm.
these little companies? Little companies.
Mhm.
they got the wallet to do it, so it's a scale. I think Meta's got 70 billion of cash on their
Mhm.
balance sheet. So yeah,
Right.
it's like they generate so much. If you think this is the direction that the world's going, and you need to have it, and if you don't, you'll lose out. Why not overspend on 14 billion here, another 20? It's a big number,
I
right?
mean,
And I think
but if you have 70 billion in cash, I mean, 14 billion is chump change.
that's what I'm saying. That's
Right.
it's a
Totally.
big number for those companies, so they're probably overvalued. But if they actually can hit on whatever process or makes things more efficient, it's going to be a home run. It's going to be a game changer. And that's why these big guys. So it is, I think, a lot of large numbers. These guys are going to continue to win. I don't know what you guys' thoughts, Kyle or Lisa.
Yeah, I think to your point, I think it's like they have the money to do it. And I mean, for smaller companies, it's expensive and they might be backed anyways by a big boy like we saw with OpenAI and Microsoft. I mean, there are issues there now and then
Yeah.
like a little breakup happening. But I can see that whether back it up or buy it out later. But other than that, I do not really see a new like rising star who is really able to get into the ranks of the big boys by itself.
Mhm.
I mean, there can be something, I mean, not with the technology and innovation that is out there now. If there's something completely new and groundbreaking in the AI space, I can see that, but they'll probably get bought out anyways on the way there. But I think it's a game of the giants as of now.
Yeah. Well, and as we're talking about tech and AI, there's also, switching gears a little bit, stable coins. So Circle IPO'd. So we actually had an IPO of a big tech company. I'll call them tech company. But I mean, just the appetite, I think, for this, whether it's AI, cryptocurrency, like the appetite just seems to be there for investors. Do you guys think that continues? Because like Circle, the IPO was initially set at $27 to $28 the night before, and then it opened up at $69 and is now at $222. And it's been on the market for what, 2 weeks?
Mhm.
So like, does this appetite continue? Or are we just starting to overpay for these things and create this, I don't want to call it a bubble, but are we making a bubble in these technologies?
Yeah, I think two things come to my mind on both of these. The first is, I think we talked, I don't know, a month or two ago about small cap IPOs. I think you and I were talking about that, and how you're skipping that step, right?
Yep.
You're not. This is a great example of that for both of these items. And then the other would be the chart that you and I, Lisa, were talking about yesterday, talking about the percentage of equity investors, like assets held per household, is now the highest on record. It's 49% of U.S. households have equity exposure. So if you look,
That's good.
yeah, it's great. 15 years ago, that number was half that, 25%. And in the 1960s and 70s, it was only 10%. So it's up 5 times since that point. So when you think about Circle or any of these other, companies that are kind of these quote unquote unicorns, or, it was like the next big thing, it does make me think the retail money block, like the flows coming into it. And so I did look on Bloomberg for Circle, and it's like most of it's retail money. So households, it's kind of that tandem, movement between households are going in, they're saying, I don't really trust traditional asset managers, traditional equity. I'm going to go for the hot dot. I'm going to try and hit a home run and knock the cover off the ball. So I think there's a bunch of stuff going on, but those are the things that come into my mind.
Keith, any thoughts?
No, you covered it. I think it feels meme-like, but I don't.
Okay.
Part of it, I think, is such a hot space that there's so much demand for it. So when you get an IPO that actually goes through, they're just going to be buyers, whether it's retail. There'll be some institutional as well. I don't know how to value it, so we haven't bought it. I don't think I'd buy it at these levels either. So there's just not enough of these companies coming public that there's so much demand that those dollars are just going to chase it. And so, but at some point in time, they do become meme-like, and they'll get chased to some level. It's just ridiculous, and all of a sudden people are like, wait, what do I own here?
Yeah, well, I think it's a bet on the future use case for Circle's product, right? So it's a stable coin. It's basically saying that the people who are buying it at these levels are basically saying that, yes, this thing's going to be bigger because we're only going to be using stable coins in the next 3 to 5 years, right?
Sure.
That's what I'm thinking, that these guys are,
then
investors are buying it at these levels for.
But then you have other competition, right? You have MasterCard, Visa are talking stablecoin stuff now, and the rails, and whether it's good or bad, or so it's like there could be other things that can maybe disruptive or at least compete with it. So that's where you have to be careful on what you're paying for things.
Lisa, any last minute comments?
I think, IPOs can be very hyped and attract a lot of attraction. Usually that was a little bit special, I would say. But I think it also came at the right point, right? We saw and we hear about stablecoin framework, regulation, broader adoption.
Genius
like big boys like Amazon, Walmart talking about it. At least, we are still away from that, but they're at least talking about introducing that in their payment systems, and that's a big thing. And then Circle IPO'd in the middle of it. So I think it was the really right timing. I think if that would have been a year ago, everyone was like, yeah, what is that, right? Meh. Maybe it would have not taken off that much, but I think everything was the right timing.
Sure.
And also I think it's the largest crypto related newish thing that IPO'd in the last couple of months. So that is also a new kind of frenzy there.
Yeah.
Outside of Bitcoin, something else, another crypto thing. So all of that I think was future technology, and the hope that it will take off and kind of be bigger down the road. But also I think a lot of it has to do with timing. That was perfect for that.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, good discussion. We'll leave it there. So if you like what you hear, like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next week.